blessed to be able to share this new content with you that has come out today. The Starting Strong booklet will officially come out on Amazon later, but we wanted to do a launch or a pre-launch at our Crossbridge campuses first the family, then everyone else. So if you pick up a copy today, I assure you're going to be blessed. But I would actually encourage you to pick up more copies. You know, there are people that bought like 20 copies to hand out to friends. It's a short read. It's like 50 pages. You can probably read it in 30 minutes to an hour, depending on the type of reader you are. I can't read 100 pages or 50 pages in an hour, but I'm telling you, big fonts. So, yeah, a lot of spaces in there as well. So it was done by our team. It was done in-house, and I'm really grateful for the team that we have, our communications team, led by Michelle. So props to Michelle for putting that together. And yes, so on your way out, grab a copy. I was thinking about this. The greatest TV shows that I came across were the ones that came out on the early 2000s, okay? So my children were deprived of this blessing because they were born later, but that's when reality TV started, especially on MTV. I don't know if you remember my favorite show, which was called Punk'd. You remember Punk'd? It was hosted and produced by Ashton Kutcher. And there's an episode of Punk'd that was my favorite episode by far. It was the episode with Drake. I don't know if you saw that episode. How many of you saw that episode? No, so I'm sure that you guys are going to go back and watch this because it was a crazy episode. What happens is, the way the show goes is, now let me tell you how the show goes. The show goes, they get these celebrities and they tell them they're going to do something, and they get them all excited about that, and then halfway through, they change the plans, they throw things at them, and it derails the whole thing, and it gets them to a place of disappointment, frustration, anger, and when they're super angry, they come out and they say, "You were punked." That's what happened. So this is what they did with Drake. They told Drake that he was going to meet the Vice President of the United States, right? So you're going to go into this meeting with the Vice President of the United States. So they have these black SUVs come to his place with Secret Service, supposedly Secret Service agents, and they put him into one of the SUVs. And there's one SUV in the front, one SUV in the back, and they're going to this place where they're going to meet the vice president. He's super excited. He said, "I don't know what I'm going to say. I've never, been before the vice president of the United States." Now, mind you, he's Canadian, right? So that's another level of anxiety there for him. And they get to the building where he's supposedly going to meet the vice president of the United States, and they go into the garage. And, they start waiting in the car. He's like, "What's going on here?" He says, "Well, there's something that's happening, and you have to remain in the car, and some of our agents are going to get out of the car to check what's taking place." So they drive this car kind of like into this platform, and it's this platform where they're able to simulate an earthquake. So he's inside this SUV, trapped in this SUV, and they start shaking the car. And the reports start coming in through this actor who is supposedly playing this agent. He said, "Hey, we're going through an earthquake. An earthquake is happening." He's like, What? I never been through an earthquake in my life. Am I going to die?" So he's all nervous, right? And then things calm down for a little bit. And then you have people coming out of the stairs into the garage, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, we need a place to find protection. We need some shelter." And so they go into his SUV. Say, "You can't get in here. This is protected by the Secret Service, and I have my staff here with me." No, "No, sir, I need to get in here." And then all of a sudden, there's a pregnant woman that comes out, and then she jumps into the SUV. And it's like, "Oh my gosh, a pregnant woman here!" And then this lady starts playing with the agent's taser, and she gets tased. Right? It's like, "Oh, she's gonna die." He's like losing his mind. And he's like, "Oh, this is not gonna happen. Oh my gosh, I never thought something like this would happen in my life." He's nervous, he's angry. He's like, "I need to get out of the car." And so he gets out of the car, and then Ashton Kutcher comes from the back and hugs him. It's like, "You got punked." Right? Go watch it. It'll still be funny after the spoiler alert. We've been going through the story of the patriarchs in the Bible. We started with Abraham, and we talked a little bit about Isaac, and we've been spending time now on his grandson, a man by the name of Jacob. And Jacob comes to a point in his life story where he gets punked. Now here's the interesting thing about Jacob. Jacob is used to punking other people. In fact, if you were here last week, the sermon was Jacob on the run. And in the previous week, it was Jacob stealing his brother's first right blessing by coming to his father dressed as his brother. Jacob had punked and played his brother. Jacob had punked and played his father. And now, in this part of his life story, when he arrives at his uncle Laban's estate, he gets punked and played by his uncle. He meets his match in Laban. And, the world's culture may say that that's karma. I like to believe that this is God sometimes putting the mirror right in front of us. I like to believe that this is sometimes God giving us a taste of our own medicine so that we can see ourselves and our deficiencies and how we mistreat others as well so that we will learn and grow. So let's turn to Genesis 29. We're going to read from verses 15 through 35. This is the story of Jacob and how he gets punked. Then Laban said to Jacob, "Because you are my kinsman, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what should your wages be?" Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance. Jacob loved Rachel, and he said, "I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel." And Laban said, "It is better that I give her to you than that I should give her to any other man. So stay with me." So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife, that I may go into her, for my time is completed." So Laban gathered together all the people of the place and made a feast. But in the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. Laban gave his female servant Zilpah to his daughter Leah to be her servant. And in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And Jacob said to Laban, "What is this that you have done to me? Did I not serve you with you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me?" And Laban said, "Well, it is not so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Complete the week of this one, and we will give you the other also in return for serving me another 7 years." Jacob did so and completed her week. Then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his female servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel to be her servant. So Jacob went into Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah, and served Laban for another 7 years. When the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. And Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben, for she said, "Because the Lord has looked upon my affliction, for now my husband will love me." She conceived again and bore a son, and said, "Because the Lord has heard that I am hated, he has given me this son also." And she called his name Simeon. Again she conceived and bore a son, and said, "Now this time my husband will be attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore his name shall be called Levi." And she conceived again and bore a son, and said, "This time I will praise the Lord." Therefore she called his name Judah. Then she ceased bearing. This is the word of the Lord. It is common for art to emulate life. As we see in the example of that reality show and in the life of Jacob, we notice that these things commonly happen to us. We have been through moments in life where we have felt played, where we have felt used, where we have felt abused, where the shame is on us and the egg is on our face. We have come from relationships and have said, "I thought that they would be loyal." We have come back and said, "I thought that all the sacrifice and all the time I deposited to get to that place in my career would be worth it, and I'm more miserable now than when I had started." You have come back and you have said, "I have thought that by living a moral life. I had thought that by accumulating possessions and guaranteeing my future, I would find comfort and I would find my sense of purpose in life. And I am as empty as when I started in the first place. You have said, I thought that by putting that person in office, he would fix all of our problems. And a year into that administration, you have said, it hasn't met my expectations. I feel disappointed. Now, the thing about these experiences is that these experiences that we have all been through, that maybe you're going through today, they have the power to paralyze us. This is what psychology calls trauma. When you go through these experiences, you experience trauma. And if you don't deal with these past experiences in a healthy way, not only will you not move on, but you will find yourself again over and over again in similar experiences. I believe that the story of Jacob is here for us to be able to see ourselves in Jacob and find freedom and liberation so that we don't approach life and anything in life with naivete, but with realism, with a sober mind, and that we're able to navigate through these issues of life without having disappointments come to us. They will always come, but without having them come to us and completely destroy us and paralyze us. But in order for us to experience that which the Lord wants to do in our lives, the protection that He wants to build, the hedge that He wants to build around our hearts, we number one must understand why we get in these situations in the first place. Why do we get played in the first place? So that's the first point of the sermon. Then secondly, let's talk about how. How can we shield our hearts from these experiences in life? And then let's learn, lastly, what will happen to us. What are the benefits that we will be able to enjoy if we understand why we get played in the first place by life and people, and when we're able to shield our hearts from these disappointing experiences. Why, how, and what? Why first? I don't know if you were paying attention to the story. After all, the text was pretty long today. But one of the things that's really clear, if you were to go back and reread the text, is that every single character here, besides Laban, gets played. Jacob gets played because he is working 7 years to have the woman he loves. And when he finishes the 7 years, he gets somebody else. False advertisement. He gets somebody else. Leah, the text tells us that she was not a beautiful woman. It says that there was something wrong with her eyes. The text doesn't give us too many details, but she was not a beautiful person. She was not a head turner, right? She was somebody that would probably end her life as a single woman because no man would want to pay anything or want to marry her, to perpetuate their descendants through a woman like her that they judged she was not very pretty. And yet, her father gives her to this man, and now she has this hope rekindled of being somebody in the world because now she finally has a husband. But she believes that this husband will love her, and to her disappointment, he hates her. That's what the text tells us, because his heart had been committed to Rachel. And Rachel, by the way, is very interesting. I don't know if you noticed here the story. This is no story of Romeo and Juliet, right? Of this sick passion between these two people that despite all the obstacles wanted to be together. The text tells us that Jacob is obsessed with Rachel, but the text never tells us that Rachel is obsessed with Jacob. I don't know where you read that in the text, if that's what you assumed. He is obsessed with her, but the text doesn't say anything about her being obsessed with him. And what we can deduce from the story as we go into chapter 30 is that what Rachel wanted to be was a woman of respect in her days, which was a woman that could have a family, that could bear children. And she saw as an opportunity for her to fulfill that dream, but the text tells us that she was barren. And the text tells us in chapter 30 that because of that, she blamed her husband, Jacob. She looked at Jacob and says, "Why are you not giving me children?" In chapter 30, she comes to a point where she says, "You either give me a son or I die." It was not enough to have a husband. She needed children, and she blamed Jacob for that. Because that's what we do. When we get played, when we feel that life or people have treated us in a way that has led to major disappointment, we say that's somebody's fault. But I want you to realize that in this particular story, no one can blame anyone. Why? Because you must realize that your problems and their problems are not outside of them. Our problems are always inside of us. We tend to think that, oh, if I had a different spouse, my life would be different. Oh, if I had a different boss, my work experience would be different. Oh, if I lived in another country, oh, our experience would be different. If we had another president, things would be better and things would be different, right? So we think that all the problems that we have in life is because of some certain person or circumstance outside of us. When the Bible is pointing out and reminding us in the stories such as this one that the problem is always inside of us. It has less to do with that which has been done to us or people's behavior towards us and more towards our expectations, towards the people that we have looked with hopes towards. Now, I'm not saying that any trauma or any bitter experience in your past related to a broken relationship is all of your fault. I'm not saying that people don't have any responsibility to it. No. We want them to have responsibility. Laban, after all, he was wrong. He did cheat Jacob, just like Jacob cheated his dad and his brother. But there is something to be said about the way in which we respond, which reveals how we approach everything in the first place. See, what's happening here is this, in their hearts. And what happens in our hearts, why we get played, okay? There is an overinvestment in false hopes, you see. What's happening here to Jacob, to Leah, and to Rachel is what happens to you and I all the time. We overinvest our hearts in these false hopes. We think that somebody is going to come along the way and they're going to fix all of our problems. And we deposit all of our affections. We deposit all of our energies. We deposit all of our hopes. And I'm talking here about a potential spouse. I'm talking here about a life partner. I'm talking here about children. I'm talking here about a boss. I'm talking here about a pastor. Whenever you overinvest your heart into meeting the president or the vice president, you are setting yourself up for major disappointment. This is what's happening here in this passage. And therefore, I want to ask you a question today. Do you acknowledge it, number one? Do you acknowledge that that's what you're doing? I remember when I was a pastor in Charlotte, North Carolina. I was one of the pastors of a very large church, and I was responsible for the 20-something of the church. And I remember this girl in our ministry that had just graduated from college and started her professional career, and she started dating this guy. And her friends came over and he said, "You know who you were dating?" You know, this guy was from a well-known family. This guy was a wealthy young man. And they said to her, "Hey, listen, this guy has a track record. He has hurt many people in the past. This is not a good person for you to date." And she wouldn't stop dating him. Why? Because her friends were in audio, but the beautiful man was in front of her on video, right? And that's always a problem. When we hear from other people, hey, don't take that step, don't overinvest. But then when we see, the money that brings is so attractive. You know, the respect that I would receive if I pursue this career is so attractive. It doesn't matter when everything is on audio, when you have something that's tempting you on video, okay? So this is what's going on here. Jacob has this woman in front of him, okay? Jacob is hungry for love. He's hungry for love. Did you notice in the story that when he arrives at his uncle's house and he says, "I'm going to work for you," and his uncle asks him the question, how should I pay you? What should I pay you? He doesn't care about the money, right? He's not thinking about the money. He's not saying, "Oh, I want you to give me 100,000 shekels a year for this work." He's not saying that. he didn't care about money. He cheated his brother of his inheritance, not because he wanted the possessions, not because he wanted the money, but because he wanted his father's love. And Jacob now at this point in his life, he's depleted of love. He's running away from home. The only person that truly, really loved him was his mother, somebody that he will never see again. He's hungry for love. So when he gets to his uncle's house and he sees that girl, he says, oh, she is what my heart has always been asking for. I'll do anything for her. He offers, like most commentators will tell you, a ridiculous amount of labor in exchange for her. And Laban's like, oh, that's a great deal. Oh, for sure. Yeah. It's better to give it to her than give it to you than to give her to somebody else. Yeah, let's do it. And what he was doing was he was over-investing his heart in that love, setting himself up for major disappointment. He was going in blind. Because that's what happens when we overinvest. We're blind to reality. We're blind to the pitfalls. We're blind to the obstacles. We don't want to listen to anybody, okay? And we move forward with it. We don't acknowledge. Do you acknowledge? Do you acknowledge? So this girl, she goes and marries this guy. She ends up marrying this guy. Despite the fact that her parents said never marry this man, despite her closest friends tell her that's a danger, don't marry this guy. I sit down with her and I said, you know this person, are you sure about this decision? She's like, yeah, he's great. He's nothing like what they're saying about him. All right, they're all jealous. So she marries him. I perform the ceremony. She comes back from her honeymoon and she calls me and she says, the marriage is over. He is not who I thought he was. He hit me in my honeymoon. Can you believe that? Yes, you can, because we fall into these pits all the time. We set ourselves for these traumatic experiences because we are naive. We overinvest our hearts. Will you acknowledge that? And will you own it too? Will you own that you are doing that all the time? Because here's the fact of the matter, guys. Let me be just straight with you guys. If you don't acknowledge, if you don't own it, you are going to fall for exactly what Jacob fell for here. What happened to Jacob is going to happen to you. It has happened to you. You're going to go to bed with Rachel, but you're going to wake up with Leah. That's what's going to happen to you. You're going to go to bed with Rachel, and in the morning, Leah will be next to you. Reality will kick in, because any time that we go to bed with Rachel, we always wake up with Leah. That's what will happen. So that's why. Secondly, how? How can we shield our hearts? How can we put a hedge around our hearts? How can we protect our hearts so that we don't go through these experiences again? Now, let me just be clear what I'm trying to say here, because there is a danger for you to be hurt. Maybe some of you have been hurt. You're still living out this traumatic experience or these traumatic experiences where you were punked, where you were played, and you said, I don't want to have any relationships with anybody. You become this the cynical person. You become this isolated person, and you shield yourselves from any relations, even the ones that can be good and beneficial to you. And that's another way to perpetuate your suffering and to even speed up the level or the stage of breakdown in your life. Okay, so that's not the right way to go about it. It's not the right way to go about it. How do we go about it? And at this point, I don't want you and I to look at Jacob, because I think that in this story, at this point in Jacob's life, I don't think he really learned the lesson. We will see that he later on learns the lesson, but up to this point, I don't think he learns the lesson. But there is one other character here that does learn the lesson, and that is Leah. Jacob doesn't learn, but Leah learns the lesson. And what Leah does here, I think, can serve as a guideline for how we should protect and shield our hearts from these experiences that may come our way. The first thing that Leah does and that we must do is we must adjust our expectations about life and about people. You must adjust your expectations about life and about people. That's what we we may have to do. Look at Leah's life after she is married to Jacob. So her hope, like I said before, is that he will at some point love her. He doesn't want her. He didn't work for her. He worked for her sister. He loved her sister. He didn't love her. But she said, maybe if I do certain things, maybe if I perform adequately and correctly, he will turn his head towards me. He will see me. He will love me. And so what did she do? She began to leverage her fertility in exchange for his love. That's what she's doing. She is bearing children. By the way, back in those days, that's how a woman fulfilled her purpose, okay, was by bearing children and giving the opportunity for her descendants to move forward into history. So she is giving him children. And every time that she gives a son, she names the son in a way that reflects the longings of her heart. And she looks at Jacob, and it never works. The first son that she has, when you begin to read about that in verse 31, the first son that she has in verse 32 is Reuben. The word Reuben is connected to the word to see. And therefore, she names Reuben because she says, maybe now with this son, he will see me. He never notices me. Now maybe he will see me. And she has Reuben. And she says, look at this beautiful boy. And he's like, oh, yeah, he's beautiful. And he just turns around and keeps going his way. Thank you. Then the second son that she has is Simeon. And the word Simeon is connected to the word to hear. And maybe she's saying now, by naming this boy Simeon, maybe he will listen to me. Maybe he will get off his phone when I come home and he will see me. Oh, that was too close. Too close to home. Too close to home. Too close to home. I saw some elbows flying here. Maybe he will listen to me. Maybe he will pay attention to me. And then she looks at him and he's like, what did you just say? Oh yeah, beautiful boy. And then she has a third son, and she's thinking to herself, the third is always the charm, right? It's always the charm, the third one. And she names him Levi, which means to be attached to. And she's saying, maybe this time he will be attached to me. His heart will be attached to me. After I gave him 3 sons. And she presents the third son, and he doesn't give a rip about it. And at this point, she realizes that everything that she's been doing has been futile. She realizes that, her task and her efforts is a Sisyphean task of rolling up a boulder up the hill and waiting that boulder to fall down and pushing back up again. She realizes the Sisyphean task of her fertility that she uses in exchange for his heart. And I think, I don't know, the text doesn't say this clearly, but here's what I deduce from the text is that by the grace of God, God was able to allow her to see this blind spot in her life. And she says, he will never love me. If I give him 3 sons, after 3 sons, he will never love me. And she stops doing what she was doing. She stops. She adjusts her expectations about Jacob. At some point in our life, we must understand that it's not going to be one more dollar, that it's not going to be the next relationship, that it's not going to be the new house, that it's not going to be the new neighborhood, that's not going to be better kids that are going to fulfill the hopes and the longings of our hearts. That if we deposit all our eggs in one of these particular baskets, we are setting ourselves up for major disappointment. We must stop. So that's what she does, and you must too. But then secondly, not only does she adjust her expectations about Jacob, she says, he will never give me what I want. Unless you say, my job will never give me what I want, romance will never give me what I want. Unless you do that, you will not be free. But here's the second thing that she does. She course corrects the direction and the trajectory of her heart. She notices and understands that her heart is moving in a very unhealthy trajectory. It's moving in the trajectory of a codependent relationship. It's moving in the direction of bitterness. It's moving in the direction of contempt and more family crisis. And she says, I have to redirect my heart. Now, here's the thing. It's not enough for you to intercept the trajectory of your heart. It's not enough for you to take your heart off of certain things and off of certain people. You have to place it in a solid foundation. Because if you don't do that, you will fall into the same error, into the same mistake over and over again. I knew a guy that was addicted to alcohol, and what he did to cope with that addiction is he gave himself to promiscuity. So he replaced one idol. He replaced one addiction for another. It's not enough. You have to put it in a solid foundation. You have to re-aim your heart. See, what she did was she re-aimed her heart. Listen what she did in the fourth child, after she had the fourth child. Look at what she did. It's in verse 35, which was the last verse that we read. And she conceived again and bore a son and said, look at what she said when she had the fourth son. This time I will praise the Lord. You know, that's an amazing statement. What she's saying is, the other 3 times I praised Jacob. I had these sons because I praised Jacob. This time, I'm not going to praise Jacob anymore. This time, I'm going to praise the Lord. I'm not going to look at Jacob after I bear this son and bring it to him. I'm not going to look for his approval, with an extended tongue out of my mouth. Say, will you give it to me? Will you give it to me? I'm not going to do that again. I was worshiping him. I will this time praise the Lord. She re-aims her heart towards God. See, you cannot just redirect the trajectory of your heart. You have to re-aim your heart. You have to change the aim of your heart. And she changes it to be God. And when she does that, she is delivered. When she does that, she finds peace. Why? Because this is what the text tells us, the last part of that verse. Therefore, she called his name Judah. Then she ceased bearing. She ceased. I don't need to do this anymore. I don't need to earn his approval anymore. She stops. She finds peace. She's free. See, she realized that at that point in her life, she realized that those men had ruined her life, her dad and her husband. But she also realized that she had overinvested her hopes. And she takes them off of them and puts it on God. See, you need a true hope to displace your false hopes. You can't just replace one hope for another. You need a true hope. Only a true hope can displace your false hopes. Only a bigger hope can display your small little hopes in life. And that's what she does, and that's why she is free. Now, I know, let me say this. I know that this is not easy. It's no easy task to do that. This is the hardest thing. And we constantly find ourselves over-investing our hearts in things that will never give us the return that we are expecting. We always do that. It's so hard to say, hey, I'm going to stop investing my hopes here. I'm going to put it on God. This is the hardest thing. It takes a special power. You can't do this on your own power and in your own strength. You need a greater power to do that. You need help. You need assistance from someone greater than you. And I believe that in this story, we can also deduce that this is by the grace of God that God begins to minister to her in her moment of distress. After all, we read in verse 31 that when the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. In other words, God gave a special grace and attention to her. And God was her therapist. God was her counselor. God was the one who allowed her to process her distress, her trauma, and her pain, and point to himself as her ultimate hope and solution. And that's what she does. And by faith, she takes that step and she removes her hopes, her false hopes from her father and her husband, and she places it on God. And it's an amazing thing that she does that because she's not certain. She has no proof. Maybe she heard in the past of how God was a covenantal God, how God had been faithful to her generation, but she had no idea that if she did that she would receive love in return. And yet she did We know that because we're on the other side of the story. And because we're on the other side of the story, thousands of years later, we have a knowledge of something that she did not have. See, she puts her faith in God not knowing what was before her. But you and I can put our faith in God because we know what's behind us. We know that we are loved. We know that if we put our faith and our trust in Him, we will be flooded by the experience of His love in our lives. Why? Because He has proved to us that He is a loving God. He gave up His own life for our sakes. You can never look at God and doubt how much He loves you, even though you may not feel like it in the present, but you can't look at the past and say that absurdity, because how can you say that if He gave up His life for you? And because He has loved you that way, by taking your ugliness and by taking everything that's wrong with you and putting it on Himself, even though in life sometimes we feel ugly like Leah, He looks at us like Rachel. God's eyes to you are not like the eyes of somebody that if there's any grotesqueness that forces you to turn the face away. God sees you with full beauty because He sees you in the beauty of His Son. He doesn't see you as a Leah, even though you feel like it. He sees you as a Rachel. That is the power that you and I need in order to redirect the aim and the trajectory of our hearts, to change the aim and redirect the trajectory. That is the power that we need to acknowledge and to own the fact that we have overinvested in things and in people that are not worth our ultimate hopes, except for God. Now, here's what this story also shows us. That when we are able to do that, when we are able to fully put our faith in Jesus Christ, something happens to us. Our relationship with God changes. There are some benefits that are attached to it. So what happens? What does happen when we do this? Two things that we see in this story. I'm going to be real quick here. The first one is that God honors us. See, God honors the sacrifices that you and I make when we repent of our idolatry, because that's what it's called, and we redirect our affections from something or someone back to Him. God begins to show favor, because here's how God works. I believe this. God's favor over our lives is a matter of stewardship. So many times we look at God and we say to God, God, can you be trusted? But that's not the right question for us to ask. The question is, can God trust you with His favor? You know, most of us here cannot be trusted with God's favor because we will spend it on other gods, little g gods. We will spend it on ourselves. We will not use God's blessings to bless others, which is what God had told Abraham and his descendants. I will bless you so that you may be a blessing. But when you take that step of faith, God honors that, and He favors Leah. He favors her. And you say, well, I was reading the story. I don't know how He favored her. Oh, let me tell you the last thing. See, not only does He favors Leah, but He begins to work in a powerful way through her. Where do you see that? Well, notice that the last son that she has, she names him Judah. And I want to give you some historic context real briefly here. The nation of Israel was made up of 12 tribes. Each tribe, right, had its head and one of the sons of Jacob. They're all named after a son of Jacob. And what's beautiful about this story is that God, through Israel, He brings His salvation into the world to redeem all of fallen creation. He does it through Israel. But here is the kicker, and here's what you need to understand about this passage. The way in which God brought His salvation into the world through Israel was obviously through one particular tribe. And that tribe that He picked was the tribe of Judah. Jesus is the Messiah that has come from the tribe of Judah. He is the Lion of Judah. God brought His salvation into the world, not through beautiful Rachel, but through ugly duckling Leah. Because she put her heart in him, he honored her, and she became the mother of the Savior. And it's in the areas of our lives that we have redirected our hopes towards Jesus, that God uses the most to bring his salvation and impact into the world. It's in the areas of our lives that have not been surrendered to Jesus that he will never use for impact into the lives of others. You know why God never uses you to bless and to impact others with your money? Because your heart is too attached to your money. Do you know why God never uses you to impact the lives of others through words of affirmation? Because you have not been set free. Your lips are tied and your heart is captive still. It has not been surrendered. It is only when there is surrender in these areas of our lives that God uses to usher his salvation into our homes, into our neighborhoods, into our city, into our world. By putting your faith in Jesus, just like Leah did, not even knowing about this son of hers that one day would come to save the world, you will not only be set free, but you will reduce the chances of you going through a season in life and coming to me or to others and say, I was played. Let's pray.